let me just first start by describing a little bit about who I am and how I got into this world. So I'm the 2012-2011 memory champion, and I actually don't have that good of a memory, which is weird to say, but what I actually do have is a really good trained memory. And there's actually a big difference, which I didn't know about when I came in contact with all this mnemonics and memory techniques, but I'll share that with you today. And I believe that anybody can actually do a lot of what I can do. A lot of people say I don't have a good memory for this or for that, but I don't necessarily believe that. It's just you need to learn a certain way to go about memorizing things, and then it's just a matter of practice and applying it. So I compete in memory competitions. This is me last year reciting a deck of cards in the finals. The reason I got started is because of my grandmother. I'll talk about her in a second. She had Alzheimer's disease, so I actually try to raise awareness for Alzheimer's, and I share my techniques with people so that they can kind of improve their memory and keep their brain health as strong as possible. And I started a charity where I climb mountains to try and raise awareness for the disease. This is me on Everest a couple of years ago. This is my lovely grandmother. She had Alzheimer's for a while and passed away in 2009. And she's really the reason why I started to become interested in memory. Before that, I would say that I had a really poor memory. And just after she went away, it really kind of hit me that, maybe I should be trying to do something for my own mind to improve it. I didn't even know if that was possible. I had always just said, okay, I have a bad memory, and that's just who I am. That's just what I've been given. But I soon found out after a bit of research that that isn't necessarily the case. So there's this championship, and it just actually happened yesterday, and I won't talk about it because I came in second place, actually. So I was trying to win 3 in a row, but that didn't happen. Memory is a funny thing, and I actually made it to the finals and slipped.
It's a good thing, because attachment is a poison.
Right, no, you're right, very good. And that's kind of how I'm dealing with it. It's kind of something I have to let go of and find something else to attach myself to. So anyway, so some of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a competition where we all come together and memorize tons of pointless information, decks of playing cards that are randomly shuffled, huge numbers, names and faces, poetry, and things like that. And just to give you an idea what people do, and this year there were more people who were able to do it, a deck of cards in a minute, a couple minutes, the order perfect. We get a 500-digit number on a piece of paper, and we got 5 minutes to memorize as much as we can. And I was able to do 303 digits in a row last year. This year I did actually 302. So maybe with age, I'm losing a bit of it, I don't know. So anyways, the cool thing is in practice, I guess not in competition it's harder because there's pressure, but in practice I actually I've always been improving. Since I started in 2009, it took me maybe 15 minutes to do my first deck of cards. And now in practice, my best is 29 seconds, which sounds ridiculous, right? But I don't feel like I have any special thing. It's just something I learn and then I practice. Just like, anybody can go to the gym and get strong. The brain is like a muscle, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I like to tell my students, that the more you use your brain, the easier it's going to be to use your brain. And no one sort of believes that. They sort of think they're born, it's genetic, you're born with a good memory or not, as Nelson said. And I think that this is an amazing example of how that's not true. This is really like building up a muscle and having it be strong. Yeah. And I'm not surprised, actually, that you get better with time, because as you'll see from the techniques, you really build up a lot of structure and meaning to what you're doing. And so that's only going to have longevity with time, and it's going to be easier to retrieve those images. And
it's like any skill or sport. I mean, sometimes I hit these plateaus and I can get faster, or I feel like I've reached the limit of how much I might be able to retain, but then I find an interesting way to train differently, or a new system that kind of crunches more information together, and then you get better. And that's like when you are running or training for a marathon or learning how to cook or whatever. So we'll talk more about that. Just to talk a little bit more about what I do with that knowledge, I started figuring out a lot about the brain that I feel like a lot of people should know and they don't. And it's not taught really in many places. So in my charity, I try to share that with people, and I try to raise awareness for Alzheimer's by climbing mountains around the world, which is another passion of mine. I figured it would be a kind of cool way to bring an important thing to me to the top of the world, to a place that's kind of very appealing. In 2011, I was on Everest. This is a picture I took going to the South Col, which is just around that corner, and then we shoot to the summit there. I actually turned around, if I can get this laser, right there, I turned around. I came into some problems with my oxygen mask, and I had to make the decision to turn around. Ultimately, it brought me here because I'm still alive, which is good. And so this year, I'm actually returning to the other side in Tibet, and this is a beautiful north face. So it kind of made sense that Tim invited me here as well, because I have this strong connection and a lot of fond memories, which I actually use to help me memorize things of Tibetan and Himalayan culture and art as well. I want to do a little exercise, which involves me just kind of painting a picture, describing a scene, and I'd love for you guys to just close your eyes and just relax, just hear what I'm saying, and whatever comes to your mind as soon as I say a certain word or idea, just go with that. Everybody's going to have something different, and just really go with it, just whatever you feel. So imagine you're in an open field, okay, large open field. There's nothing in it yet. And let me just place, or why don't you place, a dog in the middle of it. There's just a dog there, any type of dog, whatever comes to your mind. And suddenly this dog, okay, behind him, takes out a match and strikes it upon a matchbox. Okay, so this dog is suddenly holding a flame in his paw, which is kind of impossible, but just imagine it. Okay, our minds can do that. So this dog lights a match and sets fire to a large, juicy donut that's on the floor next to it. And you can imagine this donut being, fresh out of the oven. You can almost smell how fresh it is. It's hot. It's maybe oversized and just dripping with glaze. Okay, and this dog has just set fire to it, and now it's a huge bonfire. Okay, next to this dog. So the dog sets fire to a donut. And then off to the side of that, George Bush, our former president, comes moonwalking over, like Michael Jackson, okay, backwards sliding. And you can picture him in his presidential attire, right, in his gray suit and maybe red and blue tie, and he's doing his little squinty-eyed and chuckle with his shoulders, We can all picture him very well. And so he's moonwalking over to the scene with the dog. And while he's doing that, he's smoking a cigarette very incessantly. Okay, he's puffing on it. And so yeah, we have the dog setting fire to a donut, George Bush moonwalking over while smoking a cigarette. And then he flicks the cigarette off into the distance, and it lands on the head of a turtle, okay, who's just sitting there, minding his own business, strumming the guitar with a mushroom, okay? So this turtle was just sitting there. He's maybe strumming some old country song, but instead of using a guitar pick, he's actually using a big white mushroom, okay, to strum the guitar, right? So we had a dog setting fire to a donut, George Bush moonwalking over while smoking a cigarette, flicks it over, hits this turtle who's playing the guitar with a mushroom, okay? So open your eyes, and the first thing I want to ask you is, was that easy? Was that okay? Could everybody do that? Right, not too difficult. So what you guys just did, okay, for me, and I won't get into too much detail why, is actually memorized or thinking about this number. That scene exactly translates to this. So 48 is actually a dog, 66 is setting fire to something. Actually, 85 is a sandwich. I said donut, I'm sorry. It used to be, 86 is a donut. So, but just bear with me to get the idea. 72 is George Bush, 87 is moonwalking, 42 is a cigarette or smoking, and then 99 is a turtle, 53 is strumming a guitar, and 46 is a mushroom. So, and I know that sounds totally random, and you're like, what is he talking about? Why is that the way it is? But the point I want to make is that, forget that you didn't know why that represents that, but the point is, that what you did there on your end was easy. But if I were to ask you to remember this number, it wouldn't be that easy. It's actually a lot harder for us to look at a number like that and just memorize it. We kind of have to make this difficult, arduous. It's not fun. Where what I did with painting a picture for you, it's just a lot more natural. We didn't even really feel like we were memorizing it. But if I asked you the story, I'm sure you would be able to tell it back to me, no problem. So the first thing we have to understand about memorizing things is that you have to give it meaning. So this has no meaning to most people. I've given it meaning by translating numbers to a certain picture. But not many of the things that we deal with in everyday life don't have a meaning. So we need to add meaning. It's a lot easier.
Yeah. Actually, one thing that this reminds me of is what we do in the lab when we want to study memory is we bring in typically NYU undergraduates, and one of the things we make sure never to do is to tell them to use their memories, because people are really bad at knowing what they're supposed to do when you say use your memory. So we don't tell students to come in and just remember or memorize a list of words, like even if you just have the word dog setting fire to a sandwich and you showed an undergraduate, let's say 200 of those, they would have a hard time memorizing that. So what we do is we actually instruct them to form images of the words that are presented, and then their memory does what it's supposed to do. So you actually, if you tell them to remember, they don't know what to do. They typically will just rote rehearse the information, which is actually really bad for memory. Yeah. So that's an interesting link.
Okay, so why is that hard? And I'm going to leave that a little more up to you, but I always say that it's because our brains aren't really designed for that the like numbers and names, those are relatively new abstractions in the history of the development of the brain.
Yeah, especially long lists of numbers. It's even today, it's hard to know when you would need to do that. So we rely on a lot of tools and crutches for memory, right? So what you've done is build a way to be able to make these meaningless information meaningful.
Right.
And what we do is just type in numbers and never actually remember them. But you remember something. You remember where to go to find the number, right? So there is a sort of memory, meta memory of action and objects and information that you're going to build on.
Right, but there's also an obvious difference between, remembering that little story, which is kind of, I guess, more how the brain is interested in acquiring information versus the stuff that.
Yeah. So what we've discovered so I'll give you a little brain because that's what I'm here. So the part of the brain that's really important in forming memories and retrieving memories is called the hippocampus. You may have heard of it. There was a seahorse on the picture that you had there. It's sort of the Greek name for the seahorse. And the hippocampus, we know the kind of information that the hippocampus likes to associate are objects and spatial contexts. So meaningful objects, concepts, and then spatial environments, not numbers, not words even. Words that you could imagine are different. So that's what your brain is looking to encode, are objects and spatial environments, and the two coming together.
Yeah.
Not names even. Names are sort of meaningless even.
Right, it's just some of the words that that aren't in the dictionary, that don't have a meaning, right?
Right.
So the process, I call it elaborate encoding. We need to find a way to turn the things that our brain doesn't like to memorize into things that it does, okay? And that's really where the trick, the hard part is finding, for different things, for numbers, for names, for poetry, whatever, how am I going to turn that into a meaningful picture? And there are all sorts of different systems that people have devised over the years, and some people just jump and grab those, or they make up their own. And you'll find in this memory competition, a lot of people share similar techniques for, say, translating numbers into an alphabet and creating words out of that have the meaning. Mm-hmm. Other people do different things for cards, and it doesn't matter. As long as you have something that works, you have some language that you set out, then you learn it, and then you have this system. And you can do that for names, numbers, words, concepts, text and speeches. So I break down how I memorize things into kind of 2 steps, all right? And the first step is that process, which I call visualization. It's coming up with an image and then thinking about it and trying to make that picture in your mind as vivid as possible. So when you were thinking about the dog setting fire to a donut or a sandwich, just thinking about that is good, but it's not the best way to memorize it. You really want to infuse it with as many of the senses as possible. You want to kind of make that picture not so dull, but just incredibly vivid, over the top. Okay? So to keep in line with where we are, here's a prayer wheel that I took a photo of on the way up to base camp in Everest. And it's actually a pretty memorable prayer wheel. But if I were to say, remember a prayer wheel, if that was, say, a word on a list that we had to memorize, and here you are, you have to picture that. You don't just want to picture something just static right there. You really want to, I don't know, imagine what it would feel like if you touched it. How is it cold? Is it hot? It would probably be cold because you're at elevation in the mountains, right? You can imagine it's kind of metallic and probably pretty chilly to touch. The color. Some of you might think, if I were to say prayer wheel, something maybe just gold. But you know, this one has a lot of color, so that makes it a lot more vivid. You can even add more color in your mind. It doesn't have to be this exact photo, but you can maybe make it, I don't know, covered in yak dung, which is brown, and you kind of give it a little more oomph and make it a bit weird. Add that color. So the smell. Where are we? We're in the Himalayas, so incense might be kind of floating around in the air, and you can really smell that. Add that to your picture. The texture, right? The letters kind of pop out. So imagine when you're touching it, what does it feel like against your fingers? The letters are kind of rough, maybe worn even. The taste, that's strange, but imagine just actually licking the whole thing. What would it taste like? Probably really metallic, probably pretty dirty. If it was covered in yak dung, that would be a pretty bad taste to remember, but you'd probably remember it. And then the sound. I mean, when you rotate the thing, usually they make a little small little bell sound. Or maybe you can hear the chants of some monks in the background. And just add that to your picture. It makes it a lot more vivid, sorry.
So one thing that I'll add here is what he's taking you through is attending to all of these various features that you normally wouldn't attend to. You used visualization, which is funny because you don't really mean visualization necessarily. You mean
right.
sensitive. There's something about all of the senses, and we tend to be visual animals, and so we're sort of lazy in that the visual environment is what we rely on a lot.
Right.
We don't think about all the other senses that we have that can contribute, that you just listed. And I think how this helps memory is that there's the experience, any experience that we have to attend to any feature we want to remember. You have to do that. If it doesn't get into your attention, it's never going to get into your memory system. So that's like the most fundamental aspect of memory is you have to attend to that information. Yeah. But let's imagine that you attend to all of these different features. What it does for you later on when you're trying to retrieve this information is that every little detail that you've attended to acts like a key that can unlock that memory. And so let's say for some reason you didn't get the color in. For whatever reason, the color isn't a good key. If that was the only key you had, you would have lost that memory. Oh, but now you have another key. You have the taste and the smell and the touch. So that's going to help you to unlock that memory because you have multiple keys to each memory.
Yeah. And then to even add to that, I find when I memorize things, the things that stick the best are ones that have some type of movement in it. Not just an object there that you've added color and all these senses to, but something that kind of has a movement, that action, or that has some type of emotional attachment or feeling to it. So you can add some type of sad thing. Why are you thinking about this prayer wheel? Why would it be sad? Maybe you're praying for someone that passed away and that actually brings a lot of emotion from you, and that's why you're spinning this wheel. Maybe it's grotesque. You can come up with a violent image somehow. Maybe you're spinning it and there's a sharp edge that just cuts your arm off and there's just blood splattered all over the wheel. It sounds a bit much, but honestly, these are the types of things that you remember. Make it humorous. I mean, some people prefer the humor rather than the violence. But it's probably more memorable if you don't like the violence and you make it violent. And you can make it erotic. That's honestly, when I'm memorizing numbers, I made it pretty PG, but usually when people give me a random slew of numbers or cards and I have to tell them what it means, more than likely it comes up that it's something very X-rated. And it works. I mean, so.
Notice how many boys are in the memory championship.
That's true. Yeah.
So I wonder how much of that has to do with where their minds can go.
Yeah, that's true.
So one scientific thing I will say about all of this, which is great, so this brings in another structure of the brain called the amygdala, which sits right in front of the hippocampus, and it's involved in detecting fear or things that are relevant. And the amygdala is known to enhance the functioning of the hippocampus. So if something is emotional, what you get is this little signal that goes to the hippocampus that says, encode this, because this is really important. In animals, it's probably important for survival. For us, it's going to be important for knowing if we like that person, if we ever want to talk to them again. Lots of important things. So we know that the amygdala enhances memory consolidation. So what you're doing here is bringing in another structure that's really important.
Okay, so can you forget if you do that? Yes. But I don't blame it. Most people will say, oh, I'll forget things because I have a bad memory. But I honestly blame it on these two factors. You're either not paying attention, which makes sense. If you can't memorize anything, you're not paying attention. And two, that your images weren't crazy enough. So maybe you tried to make a funny picture with that, and it didn't quite work. Well, you got to go back and really add more flavor to it. Make it even crazier. Maybe try one of the different emotions, and you'll see which one kind of works for you. But don't blame your memory, just blame that picture you came up with. Try to become a little more creative with it next time. So here, this just a picture of this prairie wheel might be boring, but when you add my whole, for me, when I think of the whole journey and there's prairie wheels right there, that's a lot more meaningful because there's so many more associations with it. I can picture myself there spinning the wheels and how I was feeling at that moment and missing home and seeing this beautiful scenery for the first time. That's memorable. So let's try with a couple Tibetan alphabet letters. So the first thing we want to do is look at this symbol and think, what's the first thing that comes to my mind? What does it look like to me? Does anybody have an idea?
Melted flag.
Say it again?
Melted flag, golf flag.
Oh, right. So it's like a flag that kind of just drooped over, right? Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Somebody bending down to pick something up.
Right. And which side? I guess these are his legs, and that
No,
other way around.
other way around.
Okay.
Together, arms are outstretched.
Got it. Okay. All right. So let's go with that. And everybody might have something different, but so you have someone bending over, picking something up. Now we have to relate it to ka, which is what it represents. So ka, I think, sounds like a car. That's close enough. It's not the same thing, but it's enough. It's enough of a cue. So and you want to combine those images together. So you can imagine this letter is trying to pick up a really heavy car, okay? And you can add all sorts of the imagery that we were talking about before. The idea is that next time you see this symbol, you're going to think about bending over, picking up a car, ka, you'll remember what it stands for. This one kind of looks like cherries, in my opinion, right? Cha kind of sounds like the beginning of cherry, so cha, or maybe you could even take it to one step further, a woman doing the cha-cha-cha with cherries on her ears, I can kind of see that. This one is ma. I think that kind of looks like a woman with her legs crossed, and maybe she's sipping on a wine glass. Okay, so maybe that's my mom is sitting there cross-legged sipping some wine. So if you see these letters around the museum, try and see if you can remember what sound they are. So visualization is first step. The next step is storage. You got to put that picture somewhere, especially if it's a series of things you have to remember. When it's one thing, like that letter, which you might encounter somewhere, that will just trigger the picture you had for the meaning. But when it's a list of things or a large amount of information, you want to be able to access it whenever you want. You need to know where it is in your mind. And I always compare it to a computer that you don't just save a file on your computer. Just don't press save. You have to say what it's going to be called, what folder you're going to put it in, so that you can find it later. If you don't do that, it's kind of lost in your computer somewhere.
So this is like the key analogy. You have to know what door to open with that key, basically, or what the key is.
And we don't really think about memory in that way that, oh, I can place this specific list right here where I can go and get it later. We just kind of go through it rotely and then hope it's somewhere floating in our mind somewhere. And if we find it, you can just imagine just a bunch of papers on the floor. And sometimes we're looking at them and, oh, there it is, and then we can remember it. But with a proper storage technique, you're making files of all these papers that store your information, so you know where to go and pick up that piece of information. So one of the more simpler ways of doing that is with the linking method, where you take a series of things you're trying to learn in some order, and you want to give each one of those things a picture, but link it into a story, some kind of long narrative. And the idea is that one piece will kind of spring onto the next, and that one will continue on to the next. Kind of how we did this little story with the dog and George Bush. One led to the other. It's great. It works really quick on the fly. The problem is if you miss one of those links, if you forget one of those, you kind of lose the rest of the chain, right? I mean, you're taking a piece out of the chain, so you can maybe miss the rest. So let's just try it with the first 10 numbers in Tibetan, okay, which are pretty short words, pretty easy. I won't spend too much time on it because I think it's a pretty easy concept, and I'll just make up a story. So chick is the first number for 1, and so just picture like a little yellow chick, okay? And the next number is ni, so chick ni. So imagine a chick just resting on your knee. Okay, you're sitting down, there's a chick on your knee. And sum, okay? Kind of sounds like soon something's gonna happen. So imagine soon it's gonna turn into a she, okay, like a woman or something. So the chick is on your knee, and soon she's gonna turn into a beautiful woman sitting on your knee, a she. Okay, and then who knows, maybe she turns into a woman and she's not what you expected, so you say, nah. You get her off the knee. And she's upset. So she goes over and gets, this is druk, but she gets drunk, okay? She's upset with her rejection. And eventually she drinks so much that she just falls to the ground, doom, okay? And think of this is gay, you can think of que, like maybe she's Spanish, she's Latin, and she falls to the ground and she's just like, que, okay? And maybe this is why she says que, what? She's landed in, because there's a pile of goo, okay? And maybe it's bubble gum and she just decided to chew on it because she's drunk. Okay, so some of them erased here. So we had chick on the knee. Soon she turns into a she. I say, nah, get away. She's drunk, falls to the floor, dun. And she's like, okay. There's goo on the floor, and she starts chewing it. Okay? So let me erase these, see if you can. I'll go the other way. All right, so first word for number. Chick.
Ni, soon, she, na, dun,
Done.
ke,
Goo.
gu, chew.
Chew. Nice, very good. So, and you get the next 10 numbers too, because I think all of them, you just go chew chick, chew ni, chew soon. So you can go up to 20. So there you go. So a little bit better than the linking method, and this is really the technique that we all use in memory competitions to win and to do these really incredible feats of memory it's the memory palace. So we'll talk more about why this works, but the basic idea is taking a familiar place, like your house or some type of palace. It doesn't have to be a palace, but something you know well, a house, a journey through the park that you go through every day, or your office, and you choose a specific path through it, something that makes sense. So maybe you walk through the door, and you make your way to the house, through the house to your bedroom or something. And along the way, you have specific stops, or anchor points, I call them. So the front door might be an anchor point. Then you walk in, and there's a table just inside your doorway. That's the second anchor point. And these anchor points can be pieces of furniture or actual rooms. It doesn't really matter. Just something that you noted as a specific point. And the idea is that you go through this place, storing those images that you had for each item. So on the front door, if you had to remember chick, you would put a chick at your front doorstep, you know, and you would kind of make it creative, add the meaning and emotion and things like that. Then you go inside the doorway, put the next one there, knee, and so forth. And the idea is if you want to remember the order, all you have to do is walk right back through that place mentally. So you go back to your front door, and then there's the chick. You walk in the door, there's the knee, and so forth. Okay?
Yeah, so I think this method has been used for decades, centuries, primarily to memorize speeches. And I think there's something about our memory systems that evolved from having to explore in the environment. So learning, so when you're exploring, what are you doing? There's two elements to what you're mentioning. There's sequences, so where you went and where you went next, so where you just were and where you're going, right? So that's all about navigating in an environment, and we really easily remember that kind of thing. It just seems sort of natural. And that's what the hippocampus likes to do. And the second is you're going to have these scenes, which you're going to mention. Each space or room has its own sort of multi-dimensional quality that's really easy and distinct from every other room you've been in. It's hard to imagine two rooms that have too much overlap that you couldn't pull up any one room that you've ever been in, for example. So the hippocampus, as you know, the main structure that we use to remember all of the things that have nothing to do with space or navigation, actually probably fundamentally was built to help animals get through space and find food and navigate. So these are really important tricks that I think people have discovered and used for memorizing letters and cards that actually are building on the natural system and what it actually likes to do. So sequences and spatial environment.
Yeah, and just one thing, so you can get an idea of how you can use this in your daily life is, you know, they ask how many journeys do you have, or how do you cycle through them, or do you use the same one? And the answer is I have a lot actually. I tell people to have a few. I have a lot because I train every day, numerous hours on numbers and then cards, and so I have specific journeys for numbers and for poems and things like that. So, and I have to cycle through them because I practice so much, I don't want to use the same one over and over again because it's essentially like you're taping over things and you can get some confusion if you do that too much. So if you want to use this to remember things at home, when you go to the grocery store, whatever, just choose a couple journeys around your house. You know, start at the front door, do 10 different anchor points, that's your first one. Then do another one maybe through the backyard, 10 places, that's another. And then the idea is you can kind of play with those whenever you need them. Oh, I just used the one at the house, let me use the back door of the backyard one right now to memorize this list, and so forth. And if there's something you want to remember forever, say the order of the presidents, then you choose a specific journey or create a journey that, or a memory palace, and use it only for that. So you might have a museum that you love. Maybe this, well, no, not this place because we're memorizing other things. But maybe another museum, you can say, okay, I'm going to learn the presidents, I'm going to put it there. And then whenever anybody asks you for a certain president that you've memorized, you go to that place, always is that one. You don't tape over it, you just reserve it for that.
In New York City, a nice, easy way to think about different routes is think of 3 different ways you can get to work or to your favorite museum because of the subway system. So you're brought up in a totally different location if you took the A or the 1 or the N or R and then walk to that place in your mind, or you can actually have those journeys pretty easily.
So what we're going to do here is use this actual room as our first journey to memorize these 18 marks of the Buddha. And so some of them are a bit wordy. So the best way that I think we should go about this is kind of pick out key words. So there are 18 here. What you would typically do is choose 18 distinct points along a path around this room. 18 is a bit much for what we're trying to do right here. So what I would prefer to do, and this is kind of something you can talk about maybe quickly, chunking. So I'll group 2 words or 2 concepts together and stick them on the same thing. That way, we don't need 18 places, we need just 9, right? Which kind of condenses the journey. And that's what I do with the numbers too is, you know, 48 was a dog. And that's grabbing 2 digits and making it one thing. And now I even have a system where I have 3 digits that mean one thing.
Right, so when people studied memory, sort of naively, psychologists just wanted to understand how many things you could remember. This number emerged, 7 plus or minus 2. I don't know if you heard of it. So the idea was at any one time you could take in 7 items plus or minus 2, depending on genetics maybe or something like that, or training. But then it turned out that 7 plus or minus 2 items can quickly balloon if you're chunking. Okay, so think about the way that our phone system works. It's really easy. It's easier to remember someone's phone number. You're not so if you were just memorizing the numbers as single units, you'd have 9 items, which will exceed our capacity for encoding. But it turns out you really treat it like 3 chunks. Sorry, there's more. There's 10. You really treat it like 3 chunks: the area code, the first 3 numbers, and then the last 4, which is usually where you're putting all of your effort to memorize it, right? So that's what chunking is. It's about creating things that are meaningful. So in New York, their meaning is 212, 646, 917. There's probably one that I missed, right? That's it. There's only 3 options. You don't really have to know what those numbers are once you know where you are and what area code you're retrieving.
Right.
So that's a chunk.
Okay, so we're going to do 2 things per anchor point. And so the first thing we need to do is find 9 anchor points in this room. Again, so 1, 2, 3, the door. Sorry, I'm sorry. It was hiding. 1, 2, 3, 4, the exit. 5, the back door. 6 was the speaker. 7 was this table. 8 here, and 9. Okay, so we kind of go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so the first 2, we're going to start here in the first place. And actually, just a quick bit of history. When people say in the first place, right, they usually say that to start off some type of topic. That comes from people a long time ago when they were giving speeches by memory, where they were actually accessing their first place in their memory palace. And so they would say in the first place, and they're actually mentally walking to that first place. So we have long, slender fingers and toes and fingers finely webbed. So what we need to picture here is something that incorporates both of those concepts, and stick it right here. So long, slender fingers, that is pretty memorable in itself. You can just imagine really long fingers, someone's hand with really long fingers on the floor right there. And then toes and fingers finely webbed. So you can just imagine those fingers that are really long being kind of webbed together with somebody's foot or toes, okay? We can make that foot really disgusting, okay? So maybe somebody's foot is really smelly and crusty, and he's got fungusy nails, and it's just gross, okay? And you've got these long, slender fingers that just have to kind of intertwine with you can just imagine the contact between their sludgy, fungusy feet, okay? So long, slender fingers and toes and fingers webbed together, okay? So let's go through. That's a lot of information. One more time. So we had the long, slender fingers and the toes, right, that were webbing with them. Here we had, right, the thick or the sturdy stag thighs and the hands reaching below, right? On the stairs, we had the arms stretched and the gold, right, the golden body. Mm-hmm. And then over here, we had the 10-foot aura, right, and this smooth, silky skin, right? Then in the back, we had the lion coming through, like, right? Well-rounded. And he was well-rounded, right? So we had the lion-shaped body and the well-rounded. And as you can see, there's more to it than well-rounded. There's the soles, palms, shoulders, and crown of head well-rounded. But the idea is that this will kind of give you enough that you'll remember what you've seen before, but this will kind of trigger that exact or close enough to what you see on the board. So then where are we? Here, yes. Shoulder, right? Full round shoulders and the body erect, right? Then on this table, we had the unfurled tongue, right? Or the long tongue and the deep voice because it was commanding for the food. And then over here on the chair, we had the deep blue eyeballs and the eyelashes of the bull. And then the final one was the urna curl that emits the light and the protuberance on the head. Okay? So the best thing we're going to do is test you on that once you've done everything else. It's going to be fun because you're going to think, I'm never going to remember that. But when you come back in here and you picture yourself at each of these places, you're going to be surprised how much actually comes back. And even if it's not exact, you'll see just how close it gets.